Hey guys, welcome back. Got the jacket on today, which is a good sign because that means it's a little bit cooler today than it has been for the last several videos. We just had our first good cold front of the season move through, and I'm sure that there were a lot of good bucks that went down over the last few days. But for those of you guys that haven't had an opportunity yet this season, hopefully after this video, you'll better understand how deer move and how you can get closer to deer to hopefully give yourself a shot opportunity. And that's because in today's video, we're going to be talking about pinch points. Pinch points are one of the most effective concepts for both hunting strategy and habitat design. In this video, we're going to go over what pinch points are. We'll talk about a few examples of both natural and man-made pinch points, why pinch points are so effective while hunting, and how you can create pinch points on your property to create more predictable deer movement. So what is a pinch point? A pinch point or a bottleneck or a funnel, these are all terms used to describe the same idea. A pinch point is an area where deer movement is constricted or consolidated down into a smaller area. So instead of deer movement being spread out over 100 yards or maybe 200 yards, at a pinch point, that movement is consolidated or pinched down to, let's say, 50 yards, 30 yards, even 5 yards. There are a lot of different examples of pinch points, and we're going to go over a few of them in this video, but they all have a very common theme. Deer, when unpressured, tend to take the path of least resistance. Deer like to conserve energy and like to avoid unnecessary effort. They also don't want to expose themselves to danger if they don't have to. These are the common themes surrounding pinch points. You have some sort of an obstacle or an obstruction which creates a path of least resistance, or you have a scenario where deer are avoiding exposure and trying to remain hidden while traveling throughout the neighborhood. And again, these pinch points or bottlenecks or funnels can take deer movement that was spread out over 100 yards or so and narrow that down into a smaller area, making a much better location for your stand. And what I want to talk about now are a few real-life examples of pinch points or bottlenecks or funnels. And there are a lot of different examples of pinch points, bottlenecks, funnels, depending on the properties that you guys hunt. We're only going to touch on a few of them in today's video, but if you guys want me to make a separate video on additional pinch points, bottlenecks, funnels for different property types, let me know in the comment section below what types of properties you guys are hunting, and I'll see if we can put something together here before late October. The first pinch point that I want to talk about in today's video is for those of you guys that have more elevation on your property or for those of you guys that hunt hills, and that's the top of a drainage. And for those of you guys that don't know what I'm referring to, it is exactly that. It is where all of the water drains along the side of a hillside. You know, as the snow melts, as you get a lot of rain, over time, this water carves out a very steep ravine or a steep gully along the hillside. And if you follow this steep ravine or the steep gully to the top, you're going to come to an area that eventually flattens out. Remember, when unpressured, deer tend to take the path of least resistance. And when traveling along the hillside, deer would much rather travel around the top of that drainage as opposed to traveling down that steep ravine or that steep gully and back up the other side. These steep ravines that are carved out by water draining down the hillside are very common in areas with elevation, and they absolutely consolidate deer movement, making them great stand locations. The next pinch point example is one of my favorites and one that I focus on every single season, and that's any body of water, whether that's a lake, a river, a pond. Water consolidates deer movement. And it's not that deer can't swim, they absolutely can, but when they're unpressured, they would much rather work around the water. And the larger the water source, or if you have multiple water sources, the better. Bodies of water greatly influence movement as deer prefer, when unpressured, to work around the body of water as opposed to going straight through it. The next pinch point example that we're going to touch on is for those of you guys that have open fields where you hunt, and that's an inside corner. The first two examples were more examples of obstructions that the deer are trying to avoid, but with the inside corner, this is an example where deer are trying to remain hidden. They don't want to expose themselves in the open field. So what they instead do is they work around the back corner of an open field. Remember, deer want to take the path of least resistance, but they also want to remain safe. They want to remain in cover. And if deer want to get from one woodlot to another, it would be much faster to cut straight across the open field, but that would expose them to danger. So most of the time what deer do, again, when they're unpressured, is they remain in cover and they cut the back corner of that field when trying to go from one woodlot to another. you're going to notice there's a lot of similarities with these different pinch points. For example, this inside corner example has a lot of similarities to that first example we talked about with the top of the drainage. With the first example with that drainage, again, deer do not want to go down into that steep ravine just to walk up the other side. Where in this example with the inside corner, they do not want to walk across that exposed field. So again, instead, they stay within cover and they cut the corner. Just like with the drainage, they work along the hillside until they can cut the top of that drainage ditch. They're being pinched down at these locations for different reasons, but once you can start recognizing the similarities and the why behind what the deer are doing, hopefully you can start identifying these locations on the properties that you hunt as well. The next pinch point example that we're going to talk about is one that can really consolidate or squeeze deer movement down into a really small area. And that's a hole or a gap in an existing fence. A lot of the properties that I walk with clients while putting together a habitat design, we come across old fences. And while walking along these old fences, if there's ever a gap, a hole, or maybe a tree fell down and pushed part of the fence down, there is always a heavy deer trail right where that gap is. And it's not that deer can't jump over these old fences. Most of the fences that we find, there's not much to them anymore. It's just that when deer are unpressured, they want to take the path of least resistance. And if there is a gap in the fence, they would much rather use that path as opposed to wasting energy jumping over the fence every time. And the last pinch point example that we're going to touch on in this video is connecting cover. And again, if you guys want me to do another video on pinch points where we talk about more examples, just let me know. We can absolutely do that. But with connecting cover, it's really, again, as simple as it sounds, it's cover that's connecting two different sections of cover. So let's say you have a wood lot to the north, a wood lot to the south, and you have a narrow strip of cover that connects the two. That is a great funnel, a great bottleneck, a great pinch point. Very similar to the inside corner example, deer do not want to expose themselves in the wide open field. They want to remain in cover. They want to remain hidden. So even though it might be faster to walk across the open field, deer will rarely do that. Instead, they follow the cover as it pinches down and use that connecting cover as a bridge to get from one section of cover in the neighborhood to another. All of these different pinch point examples have one thing in common. They are taking deer movement that was spread out over 100 yards and narrowing it down into a smaller area. Now, the reason why it's being narrowed down might differ. Sometimes they're avoiding an obstacle, while other times they're trying to remain in cover. But regardless, the deer movement is being pinched down into a smaller location. And I want to give you guys an example of a pretty good pinch point that we have on this property here. And it goes back to the second example that I gave with the bodies of water. We've got a lot of water around here. And in one area of our property, we have two little sections of the woods that remain flooded. And in between that is a land bridge. So as the deer move throughout the neighborhood, instead of traveling through this water, they instead work around the water, crossing over the land bridge. This makes deer movement through this location very predictable. It takes movement that was spread out over hundreds of yards and narrows it down to about 15 to 20 yards. In these flooded areas, this water, it goes for about 300 yards. So you have about 300 yards of water with about a 20-yard section of land. So again, this location is taking deer movement that was spread out over hundreds of yards and narrowing it down, pinching it down into a much smaller area. But what if you're someone who's hunting a property that doesn't have a lot of these natural pinch points or natural funnels? Well, this is where habitat improvement and habitat design comes in. Through habitat design, we can place these different habitat improvements strategically throughout the property to create pinch points, to create predictable deer travel. And we'll touch on a few ways we can do that right now. One way that we can create predictable deer travel through habitat improvements is by putting in bedding areas. When you cut down trees, whether you're dropping large trees or hinge cutting smaller trees, to get that sunlight to the forest floor, to start the regeneration process, to encourage that new young growth, you're creating an edge along the outside of that bedding pocket that you just cut. Deer travel along edges, and when you create that bedding pocket, that section of thick cover that transitions into that more open hardwoods, you're creating that edge that deer prefer to travel along. Another thing that you can do is create what's called a blockade. This is where you intentionally drop a lot of trees to create an obstacle or a barrier to push deer around the end of it. And we can combine a lot of these different habitat improvements together, and this is where the design comes in. For example, we can create several bedding pockets to encourage deer to travel along the downwind side, that downwind edge. But in order to pinch the movement down even further and to ensure deer don't get downwind of us, we can create a blockade behind our stand location that runs perpendicular to the deer movement, which is going to do a couple things. One, it's going to reduce the chance that the deer are going to get behind our stand. And two, it's going to force more deer in front of our stand location, pinching the movement down. We can also pinch deer movement down with the way that we shape our food plots, or by the screening that we place within our food plots. There are many different ways that we can shape our food plots to really pinch that deer movement down by our stand locations. And again, even within your food plots, there are things that you can do with screening to encourage deer movement and pinch them down, get them a little bit closer to your stand location. So just because you might be hunting a property that doesn't have a lot of the natural pinch points or natural funnels, that does not mean that you can't create pinch points, create predictable deer movement on your property through habitat improvement. And hopefully by now you can see why focusing on pinch points is such a powerful strategy when trying to get closer to deer and trying to get more shot opportunities. Again, deer are trying to be as efficient as possible. When unpressured, they often take the safest, easiest, and least exposed route possible, allowing you to intercept predictable movement patterns. And guys, pinch points are great at any time during the season. It doesn't really matter when you're hunting. It's always a great idea to focus on pinch points, whether that's early season when the deer are on that bed to feed pattern, during the pre-rut, or during the rut as these bucks are cruising the neighborhood looking for does. You should always be looking for areas that consolidate or pinch down movement. And if any of you guys need or want help identifying or creating pinch points on your property, I'd be more than happy to help. I'm sure most of you guys know that, but that's what I do. Everything from full habitat plans, custom property designs, to land management and actually putting in the improvements on your property. My contact information is below. Feel free to reach out if there's anything that I can help you out with. But guys, that's going to do it for today's video on pinch points. What are they? What are a few examples? And I know we didn't cover all of the examples. So if you guys have any pinch points that you guys like to hunt, I'm sure other people would love to hear about those as well. Please drop those in the comment section below, and we will see you guys in the next video.